between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here. I'm founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders like the founders of P90X, Baby Einstein, Atari, many more, and how they overcome big challenges in life and business. Today I'm excited. We have Jay Papasan, co-authored The One Thing, the surprisingly simple truth behind extraordinary results with Gary Keller. Jay, I have to read the subhead. You probably worked really long and hard on that subheadline. It's been translated into 24 languages, has more than 275 national bestseller list appearances, including #1 on the Wall Street Journal, and has sold millions of copies. And when I ask many top entrepreneurs, one of the most impactful books they read, The One Thing comes up over and over. I've personally listened to it 3 times on Audible. Jay, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm excited to be here.
Your journey is really interesting. It goes from a translator to teacher at NYU of poetry, creative writing, HarperCollins, Keller-Williams, best-selling author of multiple books. And people know you for The One Thing, but there's many more. So I'm excited to dig in to your journey. But there's an interesting story. You had an important conversation with Gary Keller in a bathroom. What happened?
Yeah, that's a great setup for it. That's like you go right to the heart of it. I had relocated from New York to Austin, Texas, and was actually working at Keller-Williams in the tech department. And I thought I'd given up my publishing career.
Tech department? What were you doing?
Yeah, I was newsletter writer number 2.
Okay.
I was like really start over, right? There was no big publishing in Austin. I thought, I love technology. I'll try to get a start. And I got to start writing in a tech department.
Why Austin?
My wife and I, just like we were on our honeymoon for 5 months. We quit our jobs. Okay. And we debated.
I love this story.
Yeah. My wife and I, we debated where to go. I wanted to go to Chapel Hill and stay in publishing. And she had gone to school at the University of Wisconsin in Madison.
So did I. That's right.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
All right. So where did you go for spring break? Because this killed me. If you wanted to go to a beach for spring break, where would you go?
Spring break? I mean, it varied, but Mexico or something.
You went south. That kills me. They would drive to South Padre Island in Texas.
Okay.
Which, it makes sense when you look at the map, but I was like, what? You're up there by Canada. They would drive all the way down, and they would always stop in Austin and have a great time.
Yeah.
And so she talked me into visiting Austin in January. And, leaving New York City, black slush in the streets. I love the city.
I agree with that move. Don't get me wrong. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And then get to Austin, and it's 80 degrees. Everybody is so nice and friendly. Everybody, I remember Wendy and I sitting at dinner going, everybody here looks like us. Lots of young people. They're creative people. They seem to be active and doing stuff. Yeah. So we moved here without jobs in 2000. So. Okay. That's the why Austin, the long roundabout.
Okay, got it. Yeah. So you're at Keller-Williams.
Back to the bathroom story. Yeah. I'm in the tech department, and there's only 27 employees back then. And I look over, and one of the designers is clearly working on a book cover. And I wasn't trying to call him out or anything. I was like, Brad, hey, are you working on a book? So I thought he was freelancing. I was like, maybe I can hook up a freelance job too, because I love working on books.
Right.
And he's like, oh, you haven't heard, Gary's writing a book. And I just kind of let that sink in. And that's when I ran into Gary in the bathroom, the next day.
Okay. I thought you were going to say you cornered him in the bathroom. So I didn't know. It was it was a random run-in.
No, if you love the stuff that doesn't get out on your podcast. So little known fact, Gary owned the building, and it was they have A, B, and C buildings, for office space. This is probably closer to C, right? And he literally was plunging one of the toilets when I walked in. And he's such an off-the-cuff kind of guy for someone who's so successful. And he just kind of joked about it. He goes, see, the chairman of the board is not too big to still plunge the toilet if he has to.
That's right.
He walked in, saw something needed to be done, and took care of it. And
I love it.
He actually started the conversation, with that little jibe.
Right.
And I said, I can't remember what I said to that, but I said, hey, I hear you're writing a book. Do you remember I used to work at HarperCollins in New York? And he kind of did a cock of the head and was like, no, but come in my office.
Tell me more, yeah.
Yeah, tell me more. And so that's when the whole conversation that led us to being co-authors all started.
So he brought you in the office. How's what happens with the conversation?
Well, like, it's two parts. He laid out a vision for 13 books. Like, he wasn't just going to write a book. He had a vision for a franchise of books.
Yeah.
And he wanted to write books. And we tell the story in the one thing, something that could put his company on the map.
Right.
And so he pitched me on what became our first book. He called it The Millionaire Real Estate Agent.
Yeah.
And I immediately told him it would not be a bestseller because it was too much of
That
a
was
niche.
back in 2004, though, right? Or is that when it came out?
We wrote it in 2002, and it was published in 2003.
Okay.
So way back when. And it
So
was
you did not think it was going to be a bestseller?
Oh, gosh, no. There were only 1 million realtors, right, which as an audience is not huge. And, how many of them get their education from books? That was the math I did in my head.
Right.
I was like, that's too small of a market. It's too niche to be a best-selling book on the New York Times.
Right.
But it made 30 or 40 appearances, and we're coming up, like in about a month and a half, we'll have sold 1 million copies of that.
Wow, that's amazing.
Which is crazy. So I was completely wrong.
I think I saw somewhere it sold over 100,000 the first year, though, right? Or something like that?
Yeah. When we self-published it, we sold 100,000 copies. We had no idea how well we had stumbled onto the right timing.
So why? Why is that?
I think that the industry was at kind of a crossroads. There were a lot of people getting into real estate. They saw the opportunity, but it was very much an industry where people I always think of the Robert Kiyosaki cash flow quadrant. He distinguished between two kinds of business owners.
Yeah.
You were self-employed or you were a business owner.
Yeah.
And if you were self-employed, you had to hustle or you didn't make any money. Right? So you're a doctor and maybe you have a receptionist, but if you stop seeing patients, there's no money.
Right.
And the business owner is the one who owns the office and employs 5 doctors. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
There were no opportunities in real estate at that time to be a business owner. And so the book was all about creating that opportunity, and it was just the right time because a generation was being very successful and burn out, and they had no way to get out of the business successfully.
Yeah.
So timing, is one of those things that is a little lucky, a little bit of visionary.
Timing,
Yeah.
I want to go back to the conversation where you disagreed that would be a bestseller. But first I want to ask, so how do you sell 100,000 copies in the first year of a book that you obviously it's not like you were just a newbie at this. You'd been probably in the writing industry and writing for 20 years or something like that, So what allowed to sell 100,000 copies in the first year?
Okay, well, a system, right? So first off, I worked at HarperCollins, and we knew how to market books but not how to sell them. Yeah. And there's a huge difference. You can put ads on the subway, you can put ads in the papers, and you can make people aware of a book, but you can't really control selling it.
Yeah.
Gary's been in sales his whole life. So like advertising, PR, he's like, pshaw. Like, let's make it a system. And so at that time, Keller-Williams had about, I don't want to misquote. I think when I joined the company, there were 6,700 agents. And when we wrote the book, there were about 14,000.
Wow.
So it had grown considerably.
Yeah.
It was already on a nice trajectory. But basically, he got his vice chairman, Mo Anderson, and she called all 30 of our regions and asked them to all make a commitment to use the book for growth and gave them methods. What if your office managers gave away a copy of the book with everyone that they met?
Yeah.
What if all of your education events were around this and every seat had a copy of the book on it? Like, she gave those and then made them sign commitment letters, which is crazy. They're franchisees. She can't actually tell them what to do.
Right.
But she said, if you're going to make this commitment, would you be willing to sign for it?
Right.
And so I give her, through Gary's, all right, we're going to make this an initiative and we're going to grow the company, and this is going to be the one tool we're going to leverage. And what was great is I talked to Mary Tennant, who became our president here at the main company. She was running one of our top offices. And she's like, what? We're going to be in the publishing business now? You want me to sell? She was like not happy. But she did it, and it got results.
Yeah.
And so the moment it worked, then a lot of our office managers were like, wow, this is the ultimate calling card. Hey, our company wrote the book on building a business. You should read this and let's talk. And because we put a lot of effort into the writing, and it's all the credit to Gary and our co-author Dave, because at that time they had to combine 50 years of real estate experience, and I had like 18 months, right? So I was there as the writer to help the project. But they nailed it, And then a lot of people got results from it, and it attracted a lot of people. So it created a virtuous engine where business owners wanted to buy it in order to give it away.
Yeah, yeah.
Kind of a lost leader in our business.
So what was your role in the book? You said, did you put everything together? I'm curious with your writing process. Because people could have tons of ideas and all this knowledge, but it has to be put in a succinct way into a book that people can consume. It's a challenge for most
people. I think a lot of people think they have a book in them, and I would say probably 1 in 1,000 will ever write it.
Yeah. And
I would then say, this is tougher news, only about 1 in 1,000 of those is actually worth buying and reading.
Yeah, probably more. I mean, lesser percentage, I would say, yeah.
Well, maybe I'm being generous.
Yeah.
You know, something like 400,000 or 500,000 business books are written every year.
Yeah.
And so you can't possibly read all of them with self-publishing the way it is. So, all right. So how does someone?
Yeah. How did you get their knowledge into the succinct book?
Well, this book was interview driven. So we did a series of interviews with top people. We asked them all the same questions so we could look for patterns. We based it on, this is part of that original story. Gary laid out 5 books that he wanted to model.
Yes.
And one of them was The Millionaire Next Door. Have you read that book?
Yeah, yeah.
Fantastic book.
Yeah.
You know, they interviewed
Thomas Stanley, yeah.
And like, what do they have in common? Right? That's just a great approach. What do successful people have in common? Because what they have in common tends to be something anybody can do.
Yeah.
Good to Great, Body for Life, and Mia Hamm's Go for the Goal. And some book I can't remember.
So he said the Mia Hamm and the Body for Life?
Yeah, those are 2 books I'd edited
right.
at HarperCollins. So
exactly.
Just how I got the gig.
Okay. Yeah.
Telling him his idea was not a best-selling idea was not great for the job.
So let's go back to the boardroom. So you tell him this idea, it's not a good idea. What happens next?
He ignored me. Like, you know, like a lot of entrepreneurs, his vision is his vision, and he's very clear that it's the right one.
Right.
And I mean, I didn't know. I mean, I was telling him why I thought. I don't think he cared whether it was a bestseller. I think he understood that it would drive the growth of his company.
Right.
And that was his goal.
Right.
The bestseller thing happened because he was trying to write the book that would attract people, which means he had to write a good one. Anyway, long series of dominoes there.
Yeah.
But all of them had an element. So we interviewed people. We read a lot of books. We looked for strange common threads. And that first book, we would all come into the room. So it was 3 of us. This is weird. 3 people writing a book.
Right.
And he and Dave Jinks had already crafted a rough outline. And we would brainstorm like this chapter of an outline. And that was fun because I could contribute to that.
Right.
And I would come at it things from left field. Oh, it's like...
It's a good perspective.
Yeah, the Apollo Ono guy in the Olympics. I mean, I just knew sports and other stuff too. And so we'd all contribute our stories. We would then have a detailed outline by noon. And then Gary would hand that to me and tell me he wanted pages by the next day.
Yeah.
So I would usually write 10 to 14 pages a day in the afternoon, just furiously. It was tough.
Yeah.
And we did it all in about 90 days. It's a
wow, really?
440-page book. Yep.
Holy cow.
So if you have an outline, right, and you have the knowledge, you can make it happen pretty quick. Now, if you don't have those things, by contrast, the one thing, we spent almost 5 years which we had to do on the clock. And then we had to research the outline because we were moving out of real estate into general success. We had a lot of credibility in the real estate world. Who's heard of us outside the real estate world? So we really tried to make it foolproof, like really research the heck out of it.
Yeah. I want to talk about that 5-year process, but what did Gary like about the 2 previous books that you worked on? The Mia Hamm book and the Body for Life.
What do we take from them, right? Yeah, there's elements. If you looked at the Millionaire Real Estate Agent, just picked it up, right? There's like, you could look at it and you could find the DNA. All right, so the Millionaire Next Door, it was interview driven. Good to Great was also, I think, the product of 8 years of research. It's been a long time since I've read that intro.
A lot. A
lot. And he really brought the whole company, had to research with us, right, to get all the trends. So he wanted it to be fact-based.
Right.
Body for Life starts out with kind of I can't remember if it was fact or fiction or myth and truth. But basically, he was like, the best way to burn fat is not cardio, it's weightlifting. And so he started out with these kind of controversial flips.
Gotcha.
And Gary loved that. In all of our books, like the one thing has the lies, and our other books have myths.
Yeah.
So that's become how do you not think before you think is part of our formula.
Right. Debunking some of the myths that people think. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Mia Hamm's Go for the Goal, besides being very how-to, like how to head a ball in the goal, had a lot of stories driven in it. Mm-hmm. And the thing about Mia Hamm that most people didn't understand is, for someone who was a superstar, she would be, almost pathologically shy. She really does not need the limelight. She wanted to do what she wanted to do for her internal reasons, for the girls, really.
Yeah.
She was so driven for the right reasons.
Yeah.
So when we contracted with her to write that book, that was actually an idea that me and my boss, David Hershey, came up with. She's like, okay, but I'm going to feature every chapter. I'm going to feature one of my teammates. So it was far more about the other people than her. And what Gary loved about that is he didn't want the book to be about him.
Yeah.
He wanted it to be about the practitioners in the field. So that's kind of how we extracted, a little hydrogen from there, a little oxygen from there, and made water, right?
Yeah.
The elements lost their shape, but they became something new.
Yeah. So I want to go on the journey, but first I have to ask, because it's the one thing, right?
Yeah.
What's the one thing we should talk about that's in the one thing right now? Like, people don't read the book, which they should. What should we talk about? Because I like in the book you do, talk about Pareto's principle, Richard Koch, 80-20, take the 20%, the 20%, and 20%, and you get that one thing. So what should we talk about in regards to the one thing, the book?
Well, I think that's it. That's why it's so early in the book. We were trying to use the principle, like if they only read 2 chapters, would they get the most important information?
Right.
And so I've asked Gary, like right now, we have a huge initiative around time blocking. Like when you know what your one thing is, how do you set aside and protect your time to actually do it?
Yeah.
Which is really half the battle.
Yeah.
And I asked Gary, I said, why don't people time block? Like, why don't they actually put their commitments on their calendar? And he said the reason that people don't do that is they just don't fundamentally believe in the 80-20 principle. It's one thing to get it intellectually,
right?
But it's like gravity, right? You would never step off a building because even though, physicists would have a hard time explaining it to you, you can drop a pencil, you see its immediate effects, and you just know that gravity's there.
Right.
The 80-20 is one of those intellectual things that we get, but because the evidence isn't so quick or clear, it's easy to ignore.
Yeah.
And so we do a lot of stuff that's urgent, right? The old Covey, urgent, but not important.
Yeah. So time blocking is huge. And you did you surveyed people.
Yes.
And what happened? What did you find?
Well, we had a list of about, I want to say at that time, around 40,000 people.
Yeah.
And we asked them, what is your biggest challenge with the one thing?
Yeah.
And what's funny is most people knew what their one thing was and felt a little guilty for not doing it. And that's been my consistent finding forever, is that we all kind of know what we should be doing. It's not about figuring that out, but then living it. So they struggled to time block their priorities. Literally, the simplest terms, how do I make appointments with myself, not other people?
Yeah, like implementing
what I need to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that's what they said. And so you came up with
40% of them. Yeah.
Yeah. So then what did you do? How did you react to that?
Well, I hired our mutual friend, Jeff. I'd been looking for an opportunity.
Thanks to Jeff Woods. Yeah.
Yeah, Jeff Woods. And that's how we ended up here together.
Yeah.
And we built an online course, masterclass on how to time block.
Yeah.
And it's a little different than a lot of these in that it's not just a bunch of videos. We did the videos, like here's what you need to know. And then we scoped out 10 weeks of training and homework.
Yeah.
Because in the book, if you remember, how long does it take to form a habit?
Yeah.
On average, about 60 seconds.
That was a great fact in there because I have also heard, many, many sources, not necessarily backed by research, but 21 days. I was like, 21 days to form a neural pathway. So it was really interesting when in the book it talks about the 66 days.
Yeah, and so I'll close this loop and we'll dive into that because that was an aha for us too.
Yeah.
But so if you know what your one thing is, the thing that'll make you successful as an entrepreneur, our fundamental belief in the book is, wouldn't it just make a lot of sense to make that as habitual as brushing your teeth?
Right.
And so it takes about 66 days on average to do that. So we have a 10-week course to kind of help and support people through the formation of that habit.
Yeah. And
that's just been a huge eye-opener for me because we're all different. Like some people are so excited, they're like nailing it for 3 weeks and start adding new things immediately, which is a big no-no. That's a recipe for failure.
Yeah.
Other people need a lot to get out of the gate. So it's been a real learning experience. So 66 days. I'd read 30. Gary had read 21.
Right. I've heard 21 also. Yeah.
And so there is some research around neural pathways, but a neural pathway is not a habit.
Right.
Right. So that might be, I need to run is going to naturally occur in your head, but you won't go running. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
The 30 days, as best I can understand, I think it was like an AT&T. They tried to get a bunch of salespeople to do something, and they found that it took about 30 days, but there was no science behind it.
Right.
It was very anecdotal.
A very small group. Yeah.
But everybody started repeating that. So we found books that all cited each other, but none of them had an original citation.
Right. Exactly.
It's like the rumor mill, the game you play, like everybody's quoting. And so we went out and looked for the research, and we found some researchers in Australia that asked a bunch of graduate students to form a habit, any habit, like drinking water or going running or even stopping smoking.
Yeah.
And then they followed them around and asked 2 questions. Did you do it, yes or no, and how hard was it? And they found that when it got as easy as it was functionally going to get, and the effort never goes completely away, on average was 66 days.
Yeah.
I like to tell people, this is like, when I'm teaching or training, be careful of 66. Like what's the average temperature in America today, Jeremy?
Yeah. It varies depending. Yeah, exactly.
Well, it doesn't matter.
Right. Yeah.
You have to dress for Chicago. I have to dress you're in Chicago, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So the average doesn't matter.
Right.
It's just something that shows up on a chart.
Right.
So depending on the person and depending on
it's a good point. Yeah. People get fixated on this number 66, and for them it may be 102 or it may be 30.
Exactly. It could be 21.
Yeah.
That magical number.
Yeah.
There's actually people in the study that did it in 18 days. The problem with fixating on the number is if you have a finish line, what do you do when you cross it?
You relax.
Yeah, you stop.
Yeah.
You celebrate. So the whole idea of a habit is it should get a lot easier after about 66 days. Maybe longer, maybe shorter.
Right.
But when you start waking up before the alarm clock goes off,
yeah,
that's only then do you start adding new things to your plate.
Yeah, I love that, Jay.
Stand.
Yeah, I love that. So what else did you include in the time blocking mastery because of what people were saying or what you researched? So 10 weeks. What else did you include in the time blocking mastery course based off of the survey or based off of your research? Because obviously you have it 10 weeks for a certain reason. What else is in there because of the research or what people said?
We had to go back. Like we had our first group go through and we did live calls with them each of the 10 weeks.
Yeah.
And said, so what are you struggling with? We surveyed them and then we tried to address it. And I didn't expect, we had to teach people how to manage email. We had to teach people to manage the things that were most likely to get them to violate their time block.
Right, yeah.
And so there's stuff in there about basic, how to, hire a virtual assistant to do things.
Right.
How to get stuff off your plate, delegation skills.
Yeah.
When people feel trapped by the things they know they have to do eventually, they often just try to shorten their list.
Yeah.
And email, helping people with digital distractions.
Yeah.
How to sleep better. Right? So much of what we do during the day.
This is a big undertaking, Jay.
I was shocked. I was like, we're teaching them, and this is Jeff. He's brilliant at it.
Right.
Here's a system for how you can just check emails 3 times a day.
Right.
And instead of constantly bouncing back and forth and being distracted everywhere you go, I've been doing it for years.
Yeah. And
people might be frustrated because they send me an email at 1 and they know they probably won't get a response till 5.
Yeah.
If they really need me, they'll pick up the phone and call, or they'll come knock on my door.
Right.
It hasn't ever gotten me in trouble.
Yeah.
So there's stuff like that showed up in the course because people said, this is what's undoing me. And so we tried to take a few of those things off the table.
Yeah. So I want to talk about your daily routine, but also a vice. You talk about some people, they get sucked into email or Facebook. What's yours? What sucks you in? If you get hooked into this, it's over.
Oh, gosh. It used to be video games when I was younger.
What did you play? Yeah.
Oh, this is way back in the day, like Atari and stuff. So when my son was old enough to get an Xbox.
Game over. For you.
I just made a commitment that I wasn't going to play it without him. So if we play it, it's father-son time.
Yeah.
And the truth is, he's so much better than me he does it just to be nice. So, like games.
What do you play with him? What does he play?
Oh gosh, he loves all the shoot 'em up games, man.
Yeah.
So like right now, there's like some zombie game I don't even know, and Fallout 4. I don't play that with him, but he wants me to watch him play it. So I think like a lot of guys, I could fall for that.
Yeah.
I would always rather be reading a book, a novel.
So video games is big. Reading's pretty good. I mean, it's a good habit to get sucked into, though.
Well, I try to read about 50 books a year. I almost always fail, but like a book or two. But like last year, I looked up and I realized I'd read all novels. And if it was one thing, if I was reading like the great Russian novels, right, it really teach us about life. I was reading like adventure books. Right. And just pure mindless entertainment. There was no lasting value to that. So I made a commitment that for I have a shelf of my books that I really have to read that'll enrich my life. Yeah. For every one of those I read, I can go read a fun novel, a mystery or something. Yeah.
So when you get sucked in, let's say video games, I don't know, maybe that's a good example. Maybe it's like 2 hours later, you and your son are playing video games. How do you get yourself out of that? I mean, for someone who they can't control themselves. Maybe they find themselves on Facebook and like 2 hours later they're looking at some random person from high school's pictures.
In the office, I work in office settings, so video games are not going to be my distraction.
Right, yeah. What's your distraction?
Like everyone
else,
like I might sometimes when I'm researching on the internet, you know how you start following a thread.
Horrible, yeah.
And watching videos and learning. And it's really tangential, but you keep thinking something good's going to come out of it. You can lose hours. Like it's a time machine.
Yeah.
So I use triggers in my environment. Like I try to make sure that my most important work gets done early in the day. And then I really don't beat myself up if I'm watching TED videos at 4 p.m. Right? Because if my big stuff is already done, it's not about, you can't just be perfectly efficient all day long.
Yeah.
So it's about that first section of the day. So that's one strategy.
Yeah.
The other one is I'll literally have, I use Egg Timer. It's like a free site.
Yeah, I love that.
And so when I'm doing things like email, right, so I don't get lost in my email, I'll set a timer for 20 or 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And I'll just say, that's how long I have. And now it becomes a game.
Yeah.
How much can I effectively do in that time frame? And when the buzzer goes off, I might cheat for a couple of minutes, but it's like my signal, come back to earth.
Right.
So I set those throughout the day.
Yeah. So what's your daily routine look like? Like today, what time do you get up? What are some of the things you build in your schedule? Because I know you build things in so it becomes a habit.
Over time, we've developed a pretty ritualized life.
Yeah.
My wife is very anti-habit, but she's a great businesswoman, and she will call them rituals. Like she likes the things we do as a family. They're habits to me.
Right.
We get up early. We generally get up either at 5:10 or 5:30. We work out with a trainer every other day at our house. That's been kind of the accountability. If we don't wake up, he's knocking on the window.
Yeah.
Usually in the summertime, we'll like hang out in the pool after a workout and just talk. That morning time, that workout time with my wife has been great because we tend to kind of, as we're cooling off or stretching, we're already talking about our day. And she's an entrepreneur too.
Yeah.
And, maybe we're talking about the kids. We're getting on the same page. Our poor trainer is like our psychologist now.
Right.
We'll read in the morning. Like I still literally read a paper, like a physical.
Oh, really?
newspaper.
Wow. One of those?
Yeah, I know. It's an old habit from New York, right? And I'll read the paper. We'll eat a big breakfast. I like to load up a little bit in the morning, usually eggs, avocado, that sort of thing. And then,
good proteins and fats, yeah.
Yep. And so I'll usually then really look hard at my schedule because that's like my guide. What do I have to get done today is my calendar.
Yeah.
It's not a to-do list.
Yeah.
And check off on that, and then I'm off to the races. And usually I do my email and social media in one little tiny block, either before I get to work or right when I get to work. I dive into my important stuff, usually research and writing. I have a break at lunch. I almost always eat. I have a standing desk. I'm sitting right now, but I almost always eat standing up here, and I'll use that as email time, right?
Yeah.
That's a little email, social media window.
Right.
And then work through my afternoons. That tends to be meetings, maybe an interview, something like that. And then I try to do another cap at the end of the day. And we got a dog, Taco, right? So this is the first time I think I've talked about him in an interview. He's 18 months old, but he's a really active dog. He's a Brittany Spaniel. And so we have to walk him in the morning. That's my son's job. And as a family, we'll often go to the park. And we have a park about a mile from our house. We'll just all pile in the car, and the kids will climb on the rocks and the trees while we let the dog run in the off-leash park. And then it's dinner time. And like lately, I've got a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old. They want to watch The Walking Dead, and I'm all for that. They're willing to do that. So we watch TV or read together.
So, Jen, your calendar, do you have a couple things, and you circle one that's your one thing for the day? Or how does that work? How does that kind of fit into the one thing when you look at your calendar? I'm curious for myself. Yeah.
My one thing professionally is reading and writing, and that should happen every day. There are days that it doesn't. And then I usually try to double down on another day. Yeah. Because some days it just, like, people are knocking on my door. There's fires. I mean, life happens. Yeah. Our rule is if you erase, like thinking back to the old paper calendars, you must replace. Yeah. So if I lost an hour on my most important work, I'm going to pick it up. So that's the most consistent thing. And then over time, we've built habits in other areas. So on page 114 of the book, we talk about the 7 areas of your life that you might apply the one thing approach. Right. Your spiritual life, your physical life, your personal life, blah, 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 blah. And over 5 years, my wife and I have kind of agreed what will be kind of our big family habit in those areas. Yeah. So that's how we started working out together. Yeah. And so I have my workouts. I do something for our businesses. Like on Wednesdays, typically, you'll find me at 8 a.m. at a coffee shop near downtown. And I'm usually meeting with a stranger that's called talent. And I just noticed that if I could only do one thing for all of the businesses we own, it would be, because I can't have a job in all of them. Right. But I could recruit great people that either know people or might want to work in them themselves. So I spend a little bit of my networking time just meeting with people I have no agenda with, because someday I might need to call on their network. Yeah. And so I have those moments in the week and in the month. Like once a month, we check our net worth. That's our number one financial habit, is adding up our mortgages and our debts and all of that and our assets and trying to be really honest and tracking that progress. So we built those habits over time, not all at once. Yeah.
That's what I like about the book, actually, is obviously you can apply this to anything, and you do talk about it's not just a business oriented. Obviously, a lot of people use it for business and what's the one big thing, but for health, like you talk about working out, first thing in the morning, you have it, regimented in there, and for spiritual or family or whatever it is. What's the family one thing right now? Two kids,
family.
Just family. Like the family one thing, so that you all, because I know that's very important to you with your wife and your family. What is built in so that you make sure? Is it just that walk in the park every day, or what's the one thing?
Become something fun. We made a stand before we even started writing the book. Yeah. That we were going to have dinner as a family every night, but one night. So Friday is movie night. We can sit in front of the TV and watch a movie as a family, which the kids think is just a big deal. But the rest of our meals, breakfast and dinner, we have at the table together. Right. And we'd read research that parents that actually have talk time with their kids, the kids are less likely to be depressed, to do drugs, blah, 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 blah.
A lot of research here. Yeah.
Yeah, and we like to eat. So, like, the meal is a big part of our day. So that was a big family thing. Yeah. And that's also where we have a gratitude habit. It's our spiritual habit. It's not even a religious thing. Yeah. I just say, like, Gus, what's the one thing you're thankful for today? Right. And he might say Fallout 4. I mean, whatever's on his mind, it's kind of cool to know.
It's like beating you in the zombies game. No.
There we go. Beat Dad. My daughter might be into dragons or whatever her, like right now it's Pokemon Go. I can tell you that. Right. And so, and me and Wendy get to role model. But that's like that dinner time is probably the thing that we make a stand around. Yeah. Like, we want that to happen.
Yeah. And, one interesting part, obviously, about the one thing is that you talk about, and it is saying no. And it's a tough thing to do, especially when you have a lot of opportunities probably coming your way. What's the toughest thing you've had to say no to lately?
Gosh, I say no to a lot of stuff. It's really hard for me to say no to the people I care about the most. Yeah. So if our mutual friend Jeff is launching a business for us, and he's needed coaching and support. And there are times where I'm like, dude, I got to close the door. Right. Because if we fail at writing, there's no your secondary business that relies on our books is gone too. Right. So I hate saying no to the people that matter the most, even though I'm kind of an introvert. It is why I do things, about people. So that in general is always going to be it. The people that I'm closest with on a working or a family basis, if I have to say no to them, that's hard.
Yeah.
No to strangers, like, oh, I want you to write a foreword for my book. No problem. Forget it, dude. That's work.
Right. What about, we also mentioned, some of the other books, like the Mia Handbook and Body for Life, and some of the lies or myths that was in the Body for Life one. What are some of the biggest lies or myths when it comes to the one thing that people should know about?
For entrepreneurs, I mean, we already covered the 80-20, right?
Yeah.
If you treat everything like it matters equally, like a to-do list without priority, then you're just playing the game of check off. Like, how much stuff did I get done today versus did I do the most important thing, which is a horrible recipe for burnout and failure.
Yeah.
The second most prevalent one is multitasking. And, it's something that we all struggle with because we want to be in touch and connected and all of that. And so we spend a lot of time helping people with that particular one. So there's three costs, when people there's 7 or 8, but the three big ones to me, it costs you time. So people who bounce between tasks constantly are missing about 27% of their day is lost to what is called reorientation time.
That's a huge amount. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like when someone walks in the room and you're really focused and they start talking to you and you're like, oh, I'm sorry, what did you say? That switch happens all the time between you and the Twitter screen, and you're not aware of those gaps. It just happens. So it dumbs you down. Yeah. So there's tons and tons of research that show that when you're multitasking, you perform poorly. That's why you're not allowed to multitask and drive or do surgery. Right. I mean, you can't even pick up your own scalpel in surgery, right? Someone hands it to you.
Right.
So when lives are at stake, you don't multitask because you will perform badly. And we violate that.
It's a good point. Yeah.
You're doing your one thing.
I never thought about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Your life, whose life is at stake if your most important work is dumbed down with multitasking?
Yeah.
Your own life.
Yeah.
So, and then the other one is just this whole idea of loose ends, which the longer time you spend kind of switch to the secondary thing, a video, Twitter, whatever, the less likely you are to get back to the original. Mm-hmm. And that's how loose ends pile up in your life.
Yeah.
And so there's tons of evidence against it, but we all struggle.
So, Jay, what part of the book got cut out in the process that was not easy to take out? Because you can't include everything, right? And you probably wrote a ton that, met the chopping block.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah.
The book was over 400 pages long,
wow.
And we ended up cutting close to 200 pages.
Wow. Yeah.
So we had
your hard-earned effort, like half of it, just bam. So what was important? What should people know about those 200 pages that got cut out?
There was a concept that we didn't develop that if I had to go back and write an addition to the book, it explored writing about the low-hanging fruit, and that's a lie. And I think for your audience, entrepreneurs, it's probably one to talk about.
Yeah, definitely.
I bring it up a lot. So you've got a business, maybe you're in startup mode, and you get an opportunity to do a contract with, maybe a big name company.
Yeah.
But it's kind of off the path. But everybody would say, there's revenue, it's low-hanging fruit. You've got an offer for business, and you're not being successful here.
Right.
And most people will justify leaving their vision to follow the money because it seems to make sense today.
Right.
But often it's actually leading you farther away from your ultimate goals. And so I just tell people to be very wary, and I'm on just high alert. Like those things that are bright and shiny and so attractive to entrepreneurs often are leading us in the opposite direction that we need to be going.
Yeah.
So
how can someone differentiate between the low-hanging fruit and something maybe telling them your current business model isn't working? Maybe this, people are wanting this. Is there any differentiation? Because I could see that get blurred in the beginning. Like, oh, maybe we need, like you just said, we need to iterate or change in this direction. And maybe that's a mistake.
Okay. Well, there's some specific language you use. If your customers are telling you that your product is broken,
right,
you probably should listen. And I do think that if you ask them the right questions, people are actually really smart. They usually can tell you more about what they don't want than what they want.
Yeah.
But you should be listening to them.
Right.
What I'm talking about is if you're in the business of building websites for authors, And now someone says, hey, why don't you build a website for gym trainers? Well, it's a lot of money that's right today. What you're doing is you're subtracting from your expertise in one area. And what people say is, oh, this is just another vertical for us.
Right.
And what Gary would say is like, well, until you're number one over here, why are you even being distracted? If you want to start a gym trainer website business, go find the person. That'll be their opportunity, and you stay focused on yours.
It completely shifts your whole business in a different direction.
It seems so close. It's just a website.
Right.
It's just a website for professionals.
Yeah.
But if you're really trying to master what you do and you're passionate about it, if you're just working for money, you're going to end up following it wherever it leads.
Yeah.
But if you have a vision for a business that you're really passionate about, then iterating within that line is more important.
Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that. Your favorite books, business books outside of your own?
Man, I'm a junkie. I just told you I read.
I know. I asked personally because I love Audible and listen to 3 to 6 books per week. So I'm going to put some of these on my list.
Okay. Yeah. Well, here's some that have inspired me lately.
Yeah.
As a group, we've been reading a book called Exponential Organizations.
Yeah.
And it's by I want to say the dean, Salim somebody of Singularity University. Yeah. And that's about the commonalities in all the unicorn club, all the $1 billion valuation clubs. Yeah. And that's pretty fascinating. And it's very optimistic about the future, which I love. I'm looking at my shelf. That's why I'm looking away from the screen.
Yeah.
Deep Work by Cal Newport. Yeah. Which is excellent. Managing Oneself by Peter Drucker. Mm-hmm. I picked that up from Ty Lopez, who had us both on the same list, and it's a real short but impactful read. Yeah. Did you ever read The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love Stephen Pressfield books. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a fun read. And then there's 2 other ones. A book by Adam Grant called Give and Take is a book I give away a lot. Yeah. I do think that the purpose of your business, we literally coach people to form charities around their business, and it's a great way to not only grow the business but to have meaning in it. Yeah. And then the last one's a book called The Defining Decade by Meg Jay.
I have not heard of that one.
She's a psychologist that works with 20-somethings, and it's all about that decade between 25 and 35, and how for a lot of people that's their experimentation time. Right. And it's really pivotal in your marriage, your career. And I found myself reading it and going, uh-oh, I screwed up, or, ooh, I did good, pat myself back. But it explores a lot of issues for if you have millennials that work for you. It'll really give you insight into what they're struggling with in terms of the big choices. Do I move in with my girlfriend or not, right? Right. I've been married for 17 years. That's not something I'm going to be an expert on today, right. But she helps people navigate those. And I just give it away to the young people in my life.
Well, it'll be good for, when you your kids ask you for these certain questions or advice, and hopefully not in the near future.
Yeah, we got about a few years before Gus becomes a real teenager. So
you have some time.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing those. I love that. You talked about the 5-year journey. In the book, obviously, people can read it, but you talk about the domino effect. And It's not always the straight path, right? It's not always like the dominoes line up and they just kind of fall over. And it seems like that's the case with the one thing. It didn't follow that, okay, they just all lined up because it was a 5-year journey to producer. What were some of the hitches in that journey of actually writing the one thing?
Well, for one thing, the real estate market completely tanked. You might have heard about that.
Yep.
And since Gary owns the largest real estate company in the world, we actually just paused all work. Yeah. Agents. The irony is we were writing a book about focus and got really distracted, but the worst real estate recession in our lifetime kind of warranted it. So that was a big one, right? Because it's really tough to leave something and be completely embedded and then have to restart. Yeah. But once we got back in the groove, we moved. Yeah.
Hence the book Shift. That's where Shift came into play, right? That's when
There we go. And so I guess the other ones were just the sheer amount of research. We had 2 full-time researchers. Wow. And because they're researchers and one of them's become quite a gifted writer, that's not their mindset. So we asked them to find stories, quotes, and research. Like I was showing Nathan Lotka was in this morning, and I was showing the writing room. We've got 2 4.5-inch binders or 5-inch binders that are just full of research for multitasking.
Wow.
And it
That's
took me
amazing.
like 2 weeks to read it.
Yeah.
Because, like as the writer, that was the guy who wrote the first draft of that chapter, I could read it just long enough to know what they were saying, and I would just go, maybe yes or no. But they had piled it all up because we didn't want them to make that decision for us.
Right.
Because unless you're the writer, it's really hard to know what's going to resonate for you.
Yeah.
And so I ended up spending 2 weeks just going through it. So that every chapter was like that. We had
Wow.
this pile of research, and we had to go, these are really smart people, smarter than us in a lot of ways, that they've identified this as connecting. So I had to connect the dots and say, well, what matters to the student? Which is why we had to cut a lot of this, right?
Yeah.
We were so deep. It wasn't going to be meaningful to the average person.
Right. I love that. Yeah, so it's that detailed in every single chapter. So you just had compiled tons of research and compile what you think is best. And from there, it gets shaved down to whatever the meat is of that chapter.
Yep. If I can only give one piece of research to make my point, right? You can use the book to kind of make those assertions. Mm-hmm. But I like to teach. Gary is a phenomenal teacher and a coach. And so we use the research to construct kind of like, here's how you need to think about it and what you need to do about it. And it was the do about it that really mattered to us, because I don't want to just change people's thinkings. I want them to actually change their lives.
When did you start seeing traction with the book? Because, people are hearing about it now, but the reality, it came out in 2013. So it just kind of has taken on a life of its own. When did it start to gain traction?
We had a big push out of the gate, and we were on all the bestseller list for like 3 months. And like a lot of books, then you fall off.
Right.
And we followed a very normal big book cycle of about every 3 months dropping by 50%, all the way till almost a year after the book came out. And I've talked to my publisher about it many times. That's when I started doing podcast interviews. We started doing some webinars. We started experimenting with other ways to promote the book.
Yeah.
But I really think that's when people, like really busy people, actually finish the book that they bought the previous year.
Right. Exactly.
And it took that long for the word of mouth to kick in. And once that's kicked in, we'll see. For next month, it'll be tough, but we've had 23 months where year over year our sales are up.
Wow.
Last July, we sold, last July we sold 7,000 copies, which is a huge month, right? And we've already crossed 10,000 this month.
Wow.
And we're not doing really any new advertising.
Yeah. So you just attribute it to word of mouth.
That would be the number one thing. I think that if someone in the book world, that's what drove Bill Phillips' Body for Life.
Yeah.
People got results, and when people get results from a product, they really want to share it.
Yeah.
Especially if it's simple and other people can do it.
Yeah. What did you learn from working on that book, the Body for Life book?
There was a guy who was really amazing. The most curious thing about him was that email was around when we were writing that book, but he wouldn't do phone calls and he wouldn't do emails because he felt both were wasteful in terms of time. He really got that time was his number one asset.
Wow.
So he was in Colorado, we were in New York, and editing that book, we corresponded via fax because it was instant in the sense that I could send him a message, but the formality of having to type it and print it and look at it usually meant, this was his justification, people are a lot, they're not expecting the back and forth. They really get their message down before this.
Right.
And so, one, value your time. So there was a guy who, I don't know if he became a billionaire or not, but I know he made a lot of money with his supplement business before he sold it.
Yeah.
And he absolutely was willing to see the world in a different way. And that's cool. And he valued time. So those are probably the big three.
Yeah. Jay, since it's Inspired Insider, I always ask, what's the lowest point and how you push through the tough time in business?
Oh, lowest point. My father had a nearly fatal stroke.
Whoa.
Lost a, grandparent. Those are the, I don't know if you expected a business answer. Our sales dropped by 50%. But for me, the lowest low points is almost always going to be personal.
Yeah, yeah.
And I connect my personal development, right, with my professional development. You know, if I want to be a best example for my kids, then I have to be the best I can at what I do.
Yeah.
And try to role model to them what it means to be happy and successful in work. And so, like, those are the tough times for me, you know, dealing with sick loved ones, people who are struggling. You know, Gary was pretty sick at one point, not like, you know, the verge of death, but, you know, he had his mother pass away.
Yeah.
And that's really tough, you know, to lose somebody like that. And then you still come to the office. You don't want to let the team down.
Right.
And for me, at least, and for him, working through those things instead of just stopping is the way we dealt with it.
Yeah.
So anyway.
That's the reality, Jay. No, and I like that you said that because, you know, we are focused on the one thing in business or the one thing in family. And you know, we get thrown for loops when that stuff happens. So when, like, you have a family member or a mother or father gets sick, how do you shift? Like, what do you do as far as, you said you just keep going. What does that mean?
Well, partnership helps, right? You know, so, you know, you get on a plane and you go be where you need to be and you're 100% there while you're there. But you let your partners know. It's like, okay, my one thing has just shifted.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's the same thing. Like if you have a sick child at home, you're going to go home and be with them if you're a single parent.
Right.
If your spouse can't cover. And that is your one thing, right? If you're choosing work over a loved one, bad priorities, right? Well, then you have to catch up. And that's the hard part. If you're really committed to being, you know, goal driven and your, you know, thing was, I'm going to write a page a day, you know, 5 pages a week, and you lose 2 weeks because you had to go home and take care of it. Well, now you've got to pick up the pacing. You're behind 10 pages.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the next week your goal is 30 pages and maybe you do 15. And the next week you set 15 and maybe you do 10. It might take you a whole month of really grinding it out. So that's the way, you know, we try to live, and we try to definitely coach people to perform. If you get behind, get back on track fast.
Yeah.
If your people are getting behind, get them back on track on fast. When people know that you're paying attention, they don't slip and they don't stay slip because they're waiting for you to say, hey, what happened?
Yeah, yeah. What about on the flip side, one of the proudest moments, outside of obviously your kids being born and getting married and all that?
Oh, gosh, there have been a lot. You know, I've never had a book that got translated into as many languages. And so, like, we're in Indonesia and, you know, seeing our book in a bookstore, that's cool.
Yeah, especially being a translator. Because it was interesting. You were was it like medical things in France?
Yeah, I work for an orthopedic medical company, so like knee surgeries and stuff like that.
Right.
It's what I did so I could live in France.
Right,
I would
right.
never pretend to say I was a translator. I masqueraded as one so I could live in France.
Right. So it's been translated in different languages. What else has been just...
You know, the first time, I remember the first time I saw anyone in a public place reading one of my books.
Yeah.
That I hadn't personally given the book. It's one thing to walk in your living room and your mom's reading your book.
Yeah.
But to walk into your grocery store or restaurant, you know, there's a place called like Whole Foods here. It's called Central Market. They have a great, healthy restaurant. I remember walking in and there's a guy sitting at the table reading The Millionaire Real Estate Investor. And I was like, that is so cool. That is so cool. You know, you look over and someone's reading the one thing in an airport, you know, and I'm like, those are like, you know, my kids seeing my book in an airport bookstore. Like I have a series of those little moments, and each time there was a first time, it was a big deal because I'm a book nerd at heart.
Yeah, for sure. So I have a last question for you, Jay. But before I ask it, thank you for your time. Book is phenomenal. Everyone should check out The One Thing. Where should we point people towards to check out on the web? I know theonething.com. That's and then the number one thing.com. Where else should we point people towards to check out maybe the time blocking mastery? Where can they check that out?
Yeah, theonething.com with the number one is where everything lives, including my social links and all of that if they want to connect with me. Yeah. And then timeblockingmastery.com is where the new course we're offering lives. And that's pretty cool. I mean, people should check it out. I think there's 3 videos that they can watch on it without making any commitment.
Yeah. Check that out. I mean, I highly suggest it. Like I said, I highly value my time, and I've listened to it 3 times just because I think there's not enough at times I can hear that message
That's so
and
awesome.
implement it.
Thank you.
I thought you were going to say for the proudest moment. I was reading something about you're involved with Heroes for Children.
Yeah.
What is that?
So, gosh, I'll do the quick version.
Yeah.
We got challenged, as a company to stop giving each other gifts at Christmas and start giving back.
Yeah.
And so I looked up, and my wife and I, we're at a place where we're wealth building. We can give so much, but we want to do more. So why don't we we started setting goals around fundraising.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
And I went to a poker tournament for charity. It was called Heroes for Children, or Hold'em for Heroes.
Right.
And all the proceeds benefited children battling cancer.
Wow.
And there's all kinds of expenses that fall through the cracks.
Sure.
And so I attended one year. The next year I volunteered for the committee. And then the last 4 years, my wife and I have led the committee. And so each year we set higher goals. And last year we netted over $100,000
Wow.
in one night.
That's amazing.
Which for us is that's a huge number,
Yeah.
for us to finally attain with one little poker event in town. And it's
That's
just cool
amazing.
because
Yeah.
you get to meet these parents and what they're dealing with. And, just buying them gas money, can make the difference.
The little
between
things.
them. Yeah.
Yeah. Congratulations with that. That's awesome.
Oh, thanks, man. I am really proud of that.
Yeah. So my last question is about your family and how your wife's role in your success.
Muse, inspiration. I can go all those things,
Yeah.
right? Because you'll listen to this, I'm sure.
Because she's very impressive. I think I was reading about her that I think I don't know if she, business wise, I'm sure, as a wife and as a mom, also impressive. But it was, on the business side, she had sold like 1 million, then 3 million, then 20 million or whatever it was in real estate.
Yeah, she's already sold 40 million this year.
That's wild.
She's crazy successful. She's competitive with herself, not other people. She hires amazing talent and surrounds herself with it.
So what has she taught you about business?
Well, she's a natural CEO. I'm not.
Yeah.
I know that that's somebody I have to hire. I can own the business. I have no business running it. She can do both. So she's very action-oriented. She is unafraid to ask for what she needs. Mm-hmm. So when we're doing fundraising, she always raises more money because she'll just start calling random businesses. And she had T-shirts made this year. How do you feel about kids with cancer? That's how she leads.
Right.
I feel horrible about him. Well, how much would you like to donate?
Right.
Go right to it. And she inspires me. She's a great, great lady and really committed to having a big life. We want to travel. We both want to own big businesses, but we're on the same page. We want to raise great kids, and that's the bigger task.
Yeah.
And how do we do both?
Yeah.
And that means we have to say no to some opportunities so that we can be there for our family.
Yeah.
And I love that we're on the same page.
You do entrepreneur activities with your kids too.
Yeah.
Right. So what kind of things for parents of young kids or, not young kids, I'm curious of what you guys do.
Well, we ended up getting him in a different school. My son was doing great. We went to a public school. I believe in public schools, but my daughter was not flourishing there. And so there's here in Austin, Texas, a thing called the Acton Academy.
Mm-hmm. I've never heard of it. Yeah.
They have an MBA program, and the MBA was all Socratic method. It's all case studies and Socratic method.
Interesting.
And so nobody told you the answers. You had to go find them for yourself.
Yeah.
And the students were like, I want my kids to experience this.
Right.
And so they founded this small school, and we were some of the first kids to be a part of it. So my kids have to set goals every morning. They manage their own education, and they get to choose what they work on each day. And they have goals in all these categories. They eventually have to get to it. But they want to just read one day, they just read one day.
Right.
And so I'd credit what we did is we were open and willing to put them in an alternative learning environment.
Right.
But we've reinforced that at home.
Yeah.
How would you do that? So I would just say this. If you don't do the school thing, instead of telling your kids answers, start asking better questions.
Right.
So what would you do to find your shoes, Gus? What would you do if you really were hungry and I wasn't here? And they're really resourceful if you let them do it. But I'm usually so impatient. I'm like, your shoes are over there. Go make yourself a peanut butter and jelly. But teaching them and trusting them to think for themselves is the better gift.
Yeah.
But it requires entrepreneurs. We're not the most patient people. You have to slow down, and asking questions is the heart of coaching.
Yeah. What's the most interesting thing you've seen your kids discover or learn from that process?
Well, my daughter has self-discovered kind of what's called the hero's journey they talk about. And
really?
So they really have gotten, and this is cool, that failure is the path to success. And, they talk about like breaking down movies. This is the hero's darkest hour. And this is when they find their mentor. It's the classic, every tale is the same, but they've made that a business tale.
Yeah.
And so the kids have internalized that.
Wow.
And so my daughter, I don't know if she has or not, she actually thinks that she's found her calling. And
which is what?
She wants to be a programmer.
Really?
Which is, I guess writing, programming, there's some of that going on. But like she taught herself Python. Wow. And is, sitting there on the computer and will code on her days off. And I'm just like, I love that she's passionate about something. Yeah. And that whole idea that they're kind of unafraid of failure is awesome, because that's something a lot of us adults are a little afraid of.
Yeah. Jay, this has been absolutely fantastic. I really appreciate it. Everyone should check out The One Thing and their time blocking mastery. Thank you so much, Jay. I appreciate it.
Thank you, man.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other